Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Wisconsin Women in Conservation Summer Camp webinar on land management with land contractors. We are so glad that everyone could join us today. My name is Alana Kashalik, and I'm the West Central Regional Coordinator for WEWIC. We have other WEWIC team members that are on the call today as well. Can all of you wave hello? Great. We'd invite you to munch on your lunch today during the webinar. We have two great speakers who will be sharing lots of information today about land management and specifically working with contractors. To be sure that everyone can hear them, we will keep everyone muted until the end of the call. But I do really want you to encourage you to use the chat function today, which is located at the bottom of your screen. Please put any questions you might have, share any resources that come to mind, and also feel free to answer each other's questions. I know that there's a lot of expertise and experience within our audience today. Let's practice that chat function now. We would love for you to introduce yourself. Please tell us your name, where you're tuning in from, and if you'd like, what conservation project you hope to tackle this summer. Great. It's fun to see everybody, where everyone's tuning in from today. Hello, Alana. Hi, Allison. Mother. Right. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Helen. Oh, lots of great projects from monarch habitat, buckthorn and invasive species. So many great things that I'm sure you're going to learn a lot about in the talk today from Hannah and Asenath. This is a place where we would encourage you to leave any questions that come up today as we go through the webinar. Thank you. Oh, there's so many. I'm getting distracted by all the great pieces of information and all of the fun projects that everybody is going to tackle. We will start our program today with a brief introduction of WEWIC and some upcoming events. And then we'll hear from our two content experts. And after that, we'll have some time for questions. At the very end, we'll also invite people to unmute themselves and have an opportunity to chat out loud if time permits for you to stay a little bit longer. So let's go ahead and get started with an introduction to WEWIC by Esther.
Thank you, Alana. As I share my slide. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and I'm very glad that you're all here today. I'll be very quick to try and bring across what Wisconsin Women in Conservation is and does, as I know you're all waiting to hear from two invaluable resource persons who are on the call today with us. Wisconsin Women in Conservation is a project that is funded by the Natural Resource Conservation of Wisconsin. It is led by the Michael Fields Agricultural Institute in partnership with Renewing the Countryside, Marble Seed, Wisconsin Farmers Union, and research and eval for the project is done by eResources Group. And here you'll see a wonderful team of coordinators who are very passionate to work with women landowners and farmers. And if you're interested in a conservation plan, they will be the ones who will connect you to the resources that need to make the goals that you have for your land a reality. So what does Wisconsin Women in Conservation do, and how do we do it? We work with the landowners who farm, non-operators, beginning farmers. We create a safe space to share stories and connect. If you look at the picture there, you'll see women sitting along shoulder to shoulder and sharing their stories and their journey of conservation. We help meet other women who are passionate about conservation, find a network of peers and professionals to thrive with in the Tri-County cluster area, learn together about building a healthy soil, have technical support for conservation plans, build a local community to support each other and grow, and collaboratively steward our land for the future generations. This is the map that shows where we are working in, especially the tri-county clusters. The lighter toned areas will be hosting networking events and bus tours. This was the lighter shaded counties are the ones where we worked in the first iteration of the project, and the darker ones are the ones where we are working right now. They are technically on new areas where we have moved, and for this year and the next year, and most of our events will be concentrated in these darker colored tri-county zones. To basically specify what those tri-county zones are, the West Central is Trompeau, La Crosse, Monroe. South Central is Dane, Rock, Jefferson. Central is Green Lake, Columbia, and Sauk. The Northwest is Eau Claire, Chippewa, and Clark. If you live in any of these counties, we want to invite you to attend these events that we are having here and find sisterhood and community there. We just finished with our summer learning circle, spring learning circles, and we are ready for the summer. We're gearing up with a lot of field days in these areas. And so presented here is a schedule for the field days. You'll also be able to communicate your interest in getting a conservation plan for your lands if you come and visit us in one of these events. And then we also have the conservation bus tours, as I was talking about. We have potluck events coming up. The summer lunch series, which you're a part of now, we have 3 more coming up in June, July, and August. With the titles are there: regenerative ag, prairies and pollinators, and cover crops for a healthy soil. So these are the summer webinars that's coming up. We invite you to register and be a part of those webinars as well. And educator happy hours are also there in 2024. This is the week of July 8th. And in different places, educators who are involved in conservation come together and share the vision for the land, and then also work in partnership. And then our fall learning circles, even though they are there, it's quite a long way away. We just have a date set up so that you can mark your calendars and try and be a part of this group as well. All of these will be on our website for event registration. We'll also put the calendar out there so that you know what's going to come in the Vivek program. And our educator meetup, this is for the educators here. We invite all educators to join us on our November 14th Zoom meetup. And yeah, we really hope to see you all in one of these events that we are hosting this year. And thank you for joining us. Without further ado, I hand it over back to Alana to take this webinar forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther. Now that you've heard a little bit about us, we would love to hear more about all of you. We've just launched a couple of polls. If you'd take a moment to answer, we are hoping to hear a little bit more about, you shared with us one project you're hoping to tackle this summer. We'd love to hear what other projects you're hoping to implement this year, and also what are the challenges you face when implementing projects? Oh, it looks like everyone's going to be busy planting trees and removing invasive species. Also doing some trails, prescribed burning. Oh, and a few individuals looking to tackle timber stand improvement projects. For those of you that are unsure or looking to do some other projects, I'm sure you're going to hear a lot of great tips from our experts today. I bet a lot of people can relate to the challenges, the time, money, knowing where to start. I hope a lot of these questions get answered for you today. And on that point, we will go ahead and bring Hannah on screen. I want to first of all thank Hannah for being here. I've had the opportunity to work with Hannah over the years, and she is an absolute wealth of knowledge. And I'm sure you're going to learn a great deal. Hannah Spaul is the Director of Land Management for the Nature Conservancy in Wisconsin. Hannah oversees the management of over 30,000 acres of TNC-owned land in Wisconsin. She ensures that these lands are managed to the best available science to provide for sustained health of the preserves, that restoration efforts are undertaken, and that these preserves are available for the public to use in a variety of ways. Some of the efforts include implementing prescribed burning, conducting ecological monitoring, removing invasive species, native seed reintroduction to both savanna and prairie habitats, tree planting, and forest management. Hannah supports an extensive hunting program, secures grant funding for the land management activities, and manages extensive contracts across the state. One of her favorite aspects of the job is working with inspiring volunteers that assist the Nature Conservancy with land management work. Areas of expertise include fire management, prairie, oak savanna, oak forest restoration, and invasive species control. Thank you, Hannah, for being with us, and we look forward to your presentation.
For that warm welcome, Alana. It's really fun to be here. Let me just share my screen and then check with you and make sure that that comes up the way we are looking for. Okay, Alana, are you looking at that first lead slide?
Yes, it looks great. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, so thank you so much for that warm introduction. It's really fun to be here. This is an exciting audience and get a group to kind of get to share with and speak with. I think I'd like to start with a little bit of a story, just kind of conveying about why it feels so important and fun to be talking to this particular group. And I think the best way to convey that is just to share some experiences that I had. It feels a long time ago now, and it also feels like yesterday. In 2016, I participated in a prescribed fire training exchange. They are called TREXs, affectionately by the Nature Conservancy. They're a model of training focused on the exchange of information and learning around prescribed fire and wildland fire. The idea is that we put a lot of people together in one place, and at any moment in time, you are always learning and you are always mentoring and teaching somebody else. So it's a scale up, scale down, really interactive training. These trainings, TREXs, are hosted all over the country. And it's fairly standard in wildland fire, and as many of you know, in land management and forestry in this field in general, it tends to be a fairly male-dominated field. And particularly in wildland fire, it's about 90% men and 10% women. And that is the community in which I grew my career in and what most of my exposure has been around. And in 2016, a group of women decided that they were going to put together one of these training exchanges that were going to flip the tables on that. And it was going to be 90% women and only 10% men. And this was the first one, called WTREX. It was in Northern California. There were about 60 of us that came together, almost all women with a few men who came. And it was an experience that not just put me for the first time ever in a place where I was collaborating with so many women in the field on projects and mentoring other women and learning from other women. But a big part of the focus was talking about the different perspectives that women bring to a group, the different styles of leadership, if you will, a more feminine style of leadership, and how powerful that can be, how important it is, and how traditionally that style of leadership is often overlooked and undervalued. And so it was in 2016 that I really started to think about how that applied in my work, how it had impacted my career, what I could do to encourage other women to be bolder and more supported in their ventures in broadly fire, land management, restoration, conservation in general. So when I was asked to speak to this audience, it just felt really honored and really exciting to have a chance to come and speak with you. How wonderful to have a group of women who are engaged and active in the management of their own lands. So that's a little bit of context of sort of what I do and where I'm coming from. I've worked for the Conservancy for a little over 25 years. All of that has been in restoration and land management. And on our preserves, we do we manage on an annual basis probably 50 plus contracts a year. So in addition to an amazing team of a dozen plus staff who work on our lands and the volunteers that we work with, we do rely heavily on an extensive number of contractors. So I'm excited today just to kind of get to share some of those stories. I have kind of a combination of examples of the ways that the Nature Conservancy is using contractors. And I also have some more sort of personal lessons learned and sort of aspects of things I take into consideration when we are working with contractors that I hope you can find interesting and insightful. So a great deal of what we do, and I was looking at the little poll notes of just sort of getting a sense from you all about what things you're most interested in. And there's not surprisingly a heavy emphasis on invasive species, some efforts with timber stand improvement, brush cutting, woody vegetation. I saw several individuals highlight that they were working with prescribed fire. But I'm just going to try and give a sample, and we can see what kinds of questions you all have towards the end. So I broke things down a little bit, and I'm trying to think in terms of some of you may have a real depth of working with contractors, and others might just be launching your venture. Some of you may be new to your property and still in the phases of figuring out what it is that you'd like to do with it. And others of you may have already gone through that process and you're much more in an implementation phase. So there are different contractors and different approaches depending upon where you are in that phase. And so you can hire a contractor to do pretty much anything. There are contractors who do plan writing and will come out and do inventory and just help figure out what you have on the property and just do some general advising about what might be possible. You can, and sometimes they're different contractors and sometimes they're all-inclusive contractors. Certainly lots and lots of companies. We are really lucky in Wisconsin. It may not seem apparent, but lots of other states and regions simply do not have this body of contracted available professionals. There are a lot in Wisconsin that provide invasive species control, brush cutting, heavy equipment operation, tree planting, prairie restoration. So the breadth is wide. One I would like to point out here, and it's interesting to me because it's a relatively new venture, but there are companies that are starting to come online offering drone management, and it's something that we've just started to crack into. I think we've hired 3 drone projects that were for land management. These weren't just taking pictures and doing survey work, but we are currently have a treatment for spongy moth that is ongoing with a drone delivery. We've been treating wetlands, things like Phragmites and cattails with a drone application. And we are currently in the process of hiring a drone to do an aerial seeding operation. These are new to me, but I'm fascinated with the opportunities and some of the doors that are being opened by having these options. Just kind of some sort of tips, a little bit of a flow of sort of things that I found when you're trying to hire a contractor, where to find the right contractor. And I have a list of resources that can be shared after the presentation, but there's a great restoration contractor list that's put together by the Wisconsin DNR. You can search by region across the state. That link is at the bottom of this page and in the resources. I'd really encourage people to spend the time to identify the projects that you want done before you reach out to the contractors to the extent that you're able. Make a list, be as specific as you can, and try and get as much of an idea in your head about what it is that you're looking for. It'll make it much easier when you start to reach out to different contractors to try and find the right fit. I'd really encourage consideration of getting the right contractor with the right kind of equipment for the right job. getting sometimes a more expensive contractor that say might have the UTV and the boom sprayer to set up, they are going to be able to cover much more acres, much more efficiently. And not all contractors have all the same types of equipment. For another example is if you're looking at a really large area with a lot of woody brush, in a lot of cases, you may do better to hire some heavy equipment with a forestry mower rather than having the work being done by hand crews. So just consideration that getting the right piece of equipment out there can really make your dollars stretch further. Encourage you to meet with several contractors. I think encourage, you might need different contractors for different parts of your jobs, though some contractors really do provide kind of a comprehensive all-in-one. Really encourage everybody to trust your gut. In the same way, if you're hiring somebody to do house projects or anything else that you're overseeing work on, just trust your gut. If something doesn't feel right and you're not feeling good about the interaction and the connection that you've had with the person, don't pay them, don't hire them to do work. It's okay to meet with somebody and not move forward with work with them. It's okay to have hired them for work and then hire somebody differently. You are not under any obligation to have contractor loyalty. You go with the people that you think are going to meet your needs. Setting clear expectations with the contractor. We want to have high quality work. We also don't want to strive for perfection. Like contractors too are going to do the best that they can, but they may miss areas, or they might not get 100% coverage or follow up the way they wanted. So set some clear expectations that you can kind of balance between making sure you get the work done that you'd like, but having some realistic expectations about the results that will come through. I think a lot of people ask about where to figure out what to do and how to kind of even figure out that initial plan, and contractors can be really helpful for that. They've got a lot of great ideas, and obviously they have a lot of experience with different methods. So really lean into some of the ideas and suggestions that they have, and then just make sure that you're really clear on agreeing upon terms when you are ready to hire that individual. And I have a little bit more on that later. Just some examples of some heavy equipment operation that we use pretty regularly on preserves here at the Nature Conservancy. These are projects that are more than our crew can handle. Though we do own one of those forestry mowers in the top left picture, and we've got about 4 people that can operate it. It's a tremendous resource for us. It does not meet the needs that we have, and we contract out a lot of that type of machinery to come onto site to do a lot of fuel mastication, woody brush removal. The picture on the lower right was a big stream restoration project, and we just had that grapple hook, yank everything down, make huge brush piles, and burned it over time, and work that could not have been done without heavy equipment. So just an encouragement that don't be afraid of large heavy equipment. They're really an integral part of a lot of the projects that you may want to get done. A few tips about negotiating, and I share these just from a standpoint that with anything, costs, I think in our culture, we tend not to negotiate for things unless they're really, really big things. We don't negotiate a lot when we're at the store or even at farmers markets or in stores. Culturally, that isn't really how we operate. And then we find ourselves negotiating for these really big things like houses and education and cars, and in many cases, things like restoration projects. So negotiating can sometimes be uncomfortable for people. But I encourage you to ask and shop around and compare notes and try and think about what it is that you are trying to achieve and what the contractor is offering. There's a couple different ways to hire contractors. One is through a fixed bid. So you have a project with defined deliverables and you ask the contractor, how much will it cost to do these things? And they give you a price. And there's some real advantages to that. You know what the price is going in. There's a high degree of project completion and compliance because they don't get paid until it's finished. This approach can work really, really well for circumstances where you have grant deliverables, where maybe you have some public funding and you have to meet deliverables that you committed to, and you have a budget that you need to stick within. It does lend to a little less flexibility, and it does usually end up in the contractor's favor. I say that broadly. I would certainly hear contractors debate that with me, and that's okay. But contractors know what their jobs cost, and they aren't likely to bid to lose money. And so if you're sometimes going to pay a little bit more to have the bid if the contractor wants to make sure that they're not losing money on it. Counter to that, you can consider being charged at an hourly rate. Sometimes there will be different charges for different types of services. So if somebody is doing planning for you versus spraying versus heavy equipment operation, all of those things will have different hourly rates. So just make sure that you're clear and that you ask what the hourly rates are for different tasks. It may also vary on who's doing the work. If you have the company business owner coming out and doing that work, it'll probably cost more per hour than if you have their employees and technicians. So it's a nice way to work. You can put a cap on it, so you can still have something that's within your budget. You can be more flexible to switch priorities throughout the property or the season as things come up throughout the year. But it also leaves you a little bit more vulnerable to what is finished, in quotes, and you might end up paying more than you anticipated if you really want the project finished to your satisfaction. So those are kind of a couple of tips and approaches for consideration with negotiating. I just put a slide up just to share. Timber harvesting is just another aspect of contracting, the various aspects of it. And I'm not going to go very deeply into this. It didn't seem in the poll that a lot of people had timber harvest on the horizon right now. I also feel like managing timber harvests could probably be its own entire presentation. But for me, I don't really consider them any different than any other contractor. They are providing a service for us. Usually we're paying them to do the setup and the marking, and then we're usually making money on the sale. I will say sometimes in these restoration projects, there are some clever arrangements where the timber value may not be as much as one had hoped or expected, but you want the material gone. And there's some clever relationships where you can work with foresters and sellers to have the timber removed and maybe reduce the piles or get rid of the slash for you. It's sort of an exchange for some of the conservation goals that you want. So you might not make money, but you can still get a lot of conservation work done. I will share just a consideration whether or not to actually have a written document with your contractor. It has a lot of personal preference, but you can choose that. For the Conservancy, I generally have to have a contract, but not always. As a private landowner, you have a lot of choices and a lot of flexibility about that. But a contract will give you added protections, written expectations, and agreed upon costs. A non-contract just leaves things a little bit more flexible, and either can work. Just consider which one might work for you. Just talking about really big multi-contractor complex projects. These are the types of projects that even for our staff at the Conservancy, they're bigger than we can usually handle in terms of we usually end up hiring somebody to manage the project for us. They do the engineering, the project design, the permits. They will put out the bids for the heavy equipment operation, put together the subcontract for the seeding and restoration. So I won't go into those deeply, but just share that if you do find that you're working on a really big project, you're probably working with partners, and it'll probably involve a more complex structure for contracting. What else can we say? A few tips, hints and tips that I figured out over time. Just be aware of subcontracting. Like if you hire somebody to oversee all of your management and all of your restoration projects, they may, for example, subcontract, say, the forestry mowing. Just be aware of the cost impact. You are then paying somebody to oversee a project. you might do better to go direct to the contractor that has the forestry mower and hire that part of the work independently. Not good or bad one way or the other, but just be aware of the impacts that subcontracting might have. Good also to have conversations about, I don't want to call them hidden fees. I rarely work with contractors who I feel are anything but they're completely honest people, and I feel really good about the contractors that we work with. So I don't call them hidden fees, but they are sometimes unexpected fees. So just have conversations about whether there's mobilization fees, who's paying for the herbicide and other supply costs. Is that included in their hourly rate, or will you get a separate bill for that? Are they going to charge on an hourly for equipment fees and things like that? So just some other kind of tips to think about. I think I'm on about 3 minutes left, so I'm gonna move through these and be on target to wrap up and hand it off to the next presenter. I'd encourage plan early and book early, especially for spring work, especially for prescribed fires and spring invasives. Contractors book out, and if you haven't planned ahead, it's not likely that you will be getting somebody on quick turnaround. And another thought is just that there are some really great ways to, especially as a landowner, to reduce costs. And some of those things might be like if you contract somebody to do a prescribed fire, if you as the landowner put the brakes into their specifications, you can really reduce the costs. Another example might be that the best use of a contractor might be to spray invasives, but if you can map them ahead of time, you will make their time that much more efficient. Oh, I just found this quote and it just makes me happy. These things take a lot of time. Be bold, hold your ground. As much as you plan and the intent, there will be contractors who try and sell you things and tell you that what you're doing isn't right. I encourage you that what you do with your land, hold your ground with it. I'm going to talk just a few minutes about prescribed fire. I also think that I could do an entire session just on contracting out prescribed fires and putting prescribed fire on the landscape. So I'll keep this part brief. The Nature Conservancy does most of our prescribed burning in Wisconsin in-house. So these are pictures of some of our crew that implement burns. We've just started to contract out a few select burns here in Wisconsin. So we're learning with that. But a number of our staff, myself included, have been really involved with the Wisconsin Prescribed Fire Council for many years. And I encourage you that if you are not familiar with this website and interested in prescribed fire, this is the landing page to go to. They have lists of contractors, they have lists of how to make it all happen and how to do prescribed fire, and just a tremendous wealth of resources. I'll take just a moment also to touch on considerations in the wildland urban interface. I love this photograph. It's one of our Nature Conservancy conservation easement holders. This is a private landowner who is very committed to conservation. They live adjacent to one of our preserves, and we include their unit in our prescribed fire unit when we burn. They do the most amazing job of keeping the fuel around their home reduced and managed so that we can burn up to within, I'm not joking, 18 inches of their house, and we burn right the way around it. So I highlight this picture because if you're thinking about prescribed fire, or if you live in one of the many places in Wisconsin that are at risk for wildfire, there is a component to your land management that is about managing fuel and access and structure around your house. And there's some great resources for that also that will be provided in the resource link. So my last thought and consideration, these things take time. These are 3 pictures of my kid at 2 years old, 9 years old, and 16 years old. He's been coming out doing this work with me for a long time. I am not a patient person by nature, and I sometimes have to compare the pace at which restoration happens is even slower than the pace of parenting. And time pays off. It's pretty cool that my 16-year-old kid now can come out on prescribed fires with me. He does not burn on Nature Conservancy burns. Those are private lands on friends' properties that he helps with. But I just think in terms of contracting, I work with contractors that I've had relationships with for over 20 years, and I have contractors that we just hired for the first time this year. Some of our contractors have as much investment in some of our preserves as we do as staff. And I just highlight that that can be an incredibly powerful engagement to have in working in alliance with contractors. So that is the Fast and Furious tour. I'm going to close that out. Everyone's invited to put questions into the chat, and I will hand it back to Alana.
Thank you so much, Hannah. There was so much great information in there. Picked up a few new ideas and things for thinking about work on our own property. So thank you very much.
I'm trying really hard to stop sharing my screen right now. It's just taking me a moment.
That's okay. No worries at all. While we're waiting, I'd encourage you to add any questions that you have for Hannah into the chat. We'll make sure to come to those after we hear from our next presenter, who is a Wisconsin landowner, very inspiring individual who has been leading initiatives on their land. I would like to welcome Asenath LaRue. And Asenath grew up on small farms in Iowa and spent most of her adult life out west. A move back to the Midwest in 2018, combined with retirement, gave her the opportunity to pursue decades-long interest in habitat restoration. Her 25 acres in Sauk County, Wisconsin, was blessed with several interesting habitats, including remnant ridge prairies. But the woods and the bluffs were also choked with honeysuckle and red cedar, and there was an old field full of smooth brome and Canada thistle. I'm sure some of us can relate to this. She asked where to start and how. A year-long of Lone Ranger work with a lopper and chainsaw convinced her that help was needed. Since then, she developed a plan for restoration and maintenance work with land stewardship companies that has moved things along. She looks forward to sharing her experience about hiring help and learning as you go. Welcome, Asenath. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for asking me. And I can't help but wish that I had heard Hannah's talk before I started on my journey, how helpful that would have been. If we can see the first slide here, Elena, the next picture. I just probably like most of you, I am happiest when I'm outside, when I'm digging, when I'm pulling, when I'm cutting. That's where my happiness is. And I do attribute that to growing up on small farms and just being outside all the time. But my career took me to different parts of the country, largely out west. And it wasn't until I retired and moved back here to the Midwest that I really felt I had time to do something with a particular piece of land. And our current property is not large. It's only 25 acres, which is probably much smaller than those of many of our listeners. It does have a variety of habitats, but what I wanted to tell you is we bought the place in February with deep snow on the ground. And even though we could see the structure of the land and I could see that it had some nice oaks, I had no idea what the understory, what the plant base was on our property. And so that was all had to wait until that first spring to discover that. And I first noticed that we did have that one old flat fallow field, and it had a lot of bad stuff in it, but I thought maybe we can do a prairie restoration on this. I've always wanted to do that, so that interested me. And then the second thing was I got to walking around on the ridge. Our house is up on the ridge. And I went out to the farthest point and I said, now wait a minute, there was a little opening there. And I said, that's little blue stem and that's lead plant and that's prairie drop seed. I think we have a remnant prairie here. And I was so excited about that, the idea that through all the changes in our neighborhood and elsewhere in Wisconsin, here was a seed base that was still struggling on from the way it was from before anybody settled this area. So I felt I had two kinds of areas that I was interested in, had no idea how to proceed. And as I mentioned in the intro, I just started out myself. I got the loppers, I got the chainsaw, I started working on stuff, especially on the ridge prairies. And then, you know, after a few months of that, I did a kind of reality check and I said, you're one person, because my husband, who's supportive, is not at all interested in doing any of the work. You know, I'm one person, I'm not young. This is a big project. Maybe I need some help. So I did get the DNR list, and I also got a list from our local land office, and they had lots of potential help. I have to tell you, I found it a little bit intimidating because there were so many options listed and I didn't know any of them. So of course I started asking around with friends, and I had a couple of friends who had done this work for a long time. They mentioned one local person on this list, and I called him, and he's done a lot of wonderful work, but he was not very interested in what I had to offer, which was a lot of steep hillsides that you'd have to do all by hand. And he wanted something where he could use the better equipment, and I don't blame him. But anyway, that wasn't going to work. So in the meantime, I'd signed up for master naturalist training. And this is where I got the first big boost to move forward with our project. We, as part of one of the units of the master naturalist training, we had a talk and did a site visit to a property where they'd done a lot of restoration work. And it was kind of an oak savanna property, and I thought it has quite a bit in common with us. So I talked afterwards, and I got two recommendations. One was for a community group of landowners that does land restoration, and they've been great as an educational resource. And the second was a paid contractor service in our area. And they've done a lot of work with them. They spoke very highly of them. So when I got home, I picked up the phone. And this is the contractor group that I have moved forward with. They were the closest geographically to me and offered a wide range of different kinds of services. So that was one big boost to get started there. And then the second big boost was attending a Women Caring for the Land field day. It was hosted at my friend Sue's place, and it was fantastic. There were maybe 12, 15 women, each with a property, each in different levels of having worked with that property, some just beginning. And even though I didn't get another contractor name or suggestion out of that, what I did get out of it were suggestions for how to work with a contractor. You know, what kinds of things can be done on the property, what you could expect a contractor to do. And I came home from that so very enthused. So anyway, we started working on our place in a small way. That next slide would be perfect, Alana. That would be great. The next picture. This is my old fallow field, and this is now about 4 years into the wildflower seeding of that prairie. And I just wanted to it doesn't look like too much yet, of course, but I wanted to tell you that we decided to go ahead and name our prairie. And the reason we did is so that neighbors and other people who drive by would know that this weedy mess is there on purpose, because that's probably the way a lot of my neighbors look at it. But anyway, we started in a small way, treating the invasive stuff in there, and then burning and seeding, and it's coming along. I spend an awful lot of time pulling invasive weeds there. We could have the next slide. This is just a not so great view of one of my little ridge prairies. And of course, the first thing I had to do was get a bench out there so I could just sit and enjoy it. but I've spent a great deal of time here too with weed and small brush management. So how have I used the contractors? The first thing is they did help me draw up a plan. And I must say that the plans have been excellent. It's broken down the proper parts of the property I wanted to work on into small units. And then in each of the small units, they would very specifically describe the practices that they wanted to implement there and what time frame they wanted to do. So I felt I was very well informed before we started a year's work about what was going to be done. And then they have just implemented both sort of invasive weed control and a lot of invasive brush management. And I will tell you that the first day they came out and worked on the Ridge Prairie, getting down small cedars, small cherries, tons of honeysuckle and buckthorn. When I went out at the end of the first day and I saw what 3 young people who are comfortable with their chainsaws could accomplish, and they were burning it as they went along, what they could do compared to what I could do, I was sold. I realized that if I was going to see much happen on my property in my lifetime, I was going to continue this kind of help. So they have been very helpful in implementing all those things. And we've changed some goals along the way. I think that's learning by doing. And we have added controlled burns to our management practices. And I want to return to that a little bit later in the talk because I have a couple special things to say about the burning. I wanted to talk a moment about what makes this a good working relationship for me and why I'm satisfied with them as a contractor. I would say one factor is the overall professionalism. In addition to the very clearly written plans, there is in general good communication. They get back to me if I have a question. They come when they say they're going to come, which is just something I like in general. And if I find something isn't quite panning out the way I expected it to, they are responsive to what I want. And we're responsive to the overall pace that I wanted to work on too, which is, yes, let's move this along, but let's not go too fast. You know, I want to kind of do something, let the land react, and then, you know, not do too much in one thing. And they seem to get that from the very beginning. So I would say communication, the plans, the overall professionalism are something that I've been very happy with. They are experienced, they are knowledgeable, they are insured, and they can do a wide range of things. Those you could probably get with any contractor and are important. And then an added benefit and bonus of this particular group is that they employ a lot of women. And that started from the very beginning. The person who comes out and estimates and first talks to you about the plan, Brittany, has been with the company all along. She's now a VP, and it's just fantastic. And it sort of set the tone for the kind of help that I would get. And I love having young women as well as the young guys working on it. Now, what are the downsides of working with the contractor? And I would say really for me, it really just is that it's more expensive. I mean, it does cost more than if I could somehow manage to do this myself. And in comparing notes with friends who have done this work for a couple of decades or more and done a great deal of it by themselves, I know that it's costing me more than it did them. But the reasons are I'm trying to approach this alone, and I'm starting it late in life. So I don't have 20 years to do this. So I would say expense is the main downside that I have with that. Now, I have hired some additional, or I would call it ancillary help. I have hired a timber company to help. I have hired a couple of young botanists to do a native plant survey. And Hannah, I thought of you because I've just hired and completed spongy moss drone spraying. on our property because unfortunately we had a very, very bad infestation of spongy moss. If we could see the next slide. And Alana, are you telling me I need to be moving along here? Are we down to our 3 minutes?
Yeah, we're about then. So
Okay,
yeah,
well, this
has
will
been
work
wonderful.
great then. Okay, well, this is a burn that we did this spring on the pasture prairie. And I just think it's kind of picturesque for one thing, but if you notice that plume, that's a fire whirl. And I was standing talking to one of the fire people, and that's the first time we heard a roaring, and it sounded like a truck, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And it was this fire whirl that had formed, and it didn't hurt anything, and it dissipated. It was fine. But here's the thing I wanted to tell you. One of the reasons we ended back up in the Midwest is that we lost our home in Northern California to one of the large wildfires. And so I have a lot of respect for fire, and I understand intellectually how important it is. We're using it on our land, but I do not take it lightly. And it's an activity where I would always want a professional crew to be doing it. However safe it looks, I would not try to do that myself because of our own particular background with friends and families. So the next slide, please. And this is just the fire crew up on the ridge where we did a burn this spring too, and they're just about ready to get started. This was a 6-woman, all-woman fire crew. So I had to get a picture of that. I thought that was wonderful. And they did a fantastic job. So go to the very last slide here. And when I'm not out cutting brush and pulling weeds, I'm spending time with my animals. We really do have 2 real donkeys as well as the 2 metal donkeys out on the prairie. So anyway, that's my story in a nutshell. I've been very happy with our contractor. I would be nowhere near as far along on our project as we are without their help. And I know there are a variety of very, very good commercial contracting companies out there. So thank you very much for letting me share my story.
Thank you for sharing your story. That was fantastic to hear all about your prairie specifically and the work that you're doing, but also personally loved and found helpful your input about what has made that relationship working with contractors helpful, because I think it's important for us to remember that it is a relationship and that we as landowners have a stake in that as well. So thank you for sharing all of that. Before we move into the Q&A aspect, for anybody who is comfortable putting themselves on camera, I would love to invite my colleague Chris to capture a photo of all of us today. It's so exciting to see everyone here learning together, and it would be great to have a group photo. So Chris, could you let us know when you are ready, so we're all smiling and our eyes are open?
Yes. Wow. Look at all these great smiling faces. I just learned so much from these two women. I'm super inspired. I especially love the idea that, like, hey, you're later in life, but you have lots of big ideas and there's help to be had. I think that's a really, really hopeful frame. All right. I was going to wait till a few more people got their faces on. So if you were thinking about being in the photo, we'd love for you to put your camera on. It makes my pictures much better when we can see your beautiful faces. Do we want to get some questions and give people a little bit more time to get on camera? Maybe they're like, they were eating and they have spinach in their teeth or something.
Sure. Yeah. Why don't while we're waiting for everybody to get on camera, and we promise we'll let you turn camera off and go back to eating after our photo, but I'd really encourage you to put questions that you have for Hannah and Asenath in the chat. There were so many great activities that all of you were looking to take on, from invasive species to monarch habitat, prescribed burning, and other things when we asked for introductions. So please think about those questions that could help maybe help you to launch those projects a little faster or a little smoother this year. I know they will have some great advice to share.
Oh my gosh, if we just get 2 more people to come on camera, you'll balance out my screen.
Right.
Oh, one more. Oh, one more.
All right.
Okay. All right, everybody. 1, 2, 3, and then we're gonna smile, okay? 1, 2, 3. One more, just to be safe. You can even wave or just something goofy. 1, 2, 3. Thank you so much.
Okay. Before we get into specific questions, one of the questions asked in the chat was, would the slides and information be available? We will have a recording available for the talk. It usually comes out about 2 weeks after. And so you will have access to that to watch again and get any information that you might have missed or want to review. Also, we'd encourage you to share it with your friends who might not have been able to join us today. One of the questions asked by Sarah was Sarah Grace is, in terms of more expensive, could you give a ballpark of what you are spending? I have no idea what to expect and would like to know.
I'm doing, is that for me or is that for, yeah, all right, okay.
Yeah. Why don't you start, and then Hannah, if
Yeah.
you have anything you'd like to add, that would be
Yeah.
great.
Well, the range of prices of what I'm paying for range from in the hourly rate, it's 50 to 65.
And
So
that
it adds
would,
up.
yeah, and that would mostly be for more handwork than large equipment.
Absolutely, right,
So,
because I just don't, I don't have a property where the large equipment that would be more efficient can be used.
yeah. And Hannah, maybe you could speak to kind of a range of rates. I know when you get into using things that might involve forestry mower, you might be, and an operator, you might be looking at more like $100+ an hour to.
I think the sort of technician with a sprayer or a chainsaw, that sort of 50 to 65, I think is right in the range. You might find it has a lot to do with how much overhead the contractor has. The reality is larger companies are going to have higher costs. Smaller companies often have lower overhead. I think that for more experienced or more tailored, like it might be more to have the burn boss. They're going to charge more per hour, or the person that's doing the timber sale or kind of the expertise oversight. It would not be unusual for a specialty contractor to be charging more like $80 to $100 an hour. So there's a pretty big range in there. I always encourage people to consider too, as we do with any of our purchases, but not all contractors run the same business model and treat employees the same. It's not good, it's not bad, but you might find that if you're paying more, you're actually paying for somebody to have a year-round job with benefits and they have a sustained job versus somebody who might be picked up seasonally for work. Not making any judgments about one being better or worse, only that there are different hidden costs and you don't always know what it is that your money is covering. With heavy equipment operation, I mean, if somebody has a UTV or an ATV on site, they're probably going to add a $50 per hour usage charge just for having that and transporting it to the site. And if you're looking at hiring somebody operating a forestry mower, most of them roll it into something like $175 to $250 an hour to be operating that piece of machinery, and that usually comes, like, there's no added cost for the machinery. Other people might set it up differently, like you could rent the piece of equipment yourself for a week and they could operate it, so that there's different scenarios with it. Certainly bringing in heavier equipment. I've tried to put some numbers on, like, prescribed fire, like what does it cost to do a burn? And I think that that too can range. I think that if the landowner has put the brakes in, and that maybe even written the plan with and the contractor is just showing up for a crew and it's relatively straightforward, I would say a burn's probably starting around 1,500 on up to maybe 5,000 or 6,000, depending upon the complexity and the number of people needed. So things can really range.
All really helpful. I wanted to just let anybody know, if there is anybody who does need to drop off for another commitment, we are at 1 o'clock, but we are recording this. And I know Hannah and Asenath have a little bit more time to field a few more questions that are in here. So we'll stick on for a little bit longer and answer some of these great questions that all of you have. But I just wanted to give anybody permission if they need to leave, we understand. A question in here: what do you do if there is damage that a contractor causes? How do you address that?
Hannah, that's yours. Knock on wood, it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Well, we do have experience with that. I think some things to consider, like I mentioned, whether or not you have a written contract or not. One of the benefits that comes with a written contract is being transparent and seeing what kind of insurance policy the contractor has. So damage can mean a lot of things. Like, did they damage their own equipment? That's their problem. Did they damage the side of your garage? Did they damage your trees? Did they, what sort of damage is it that got caused? Did the prescribed fire cause an incident on somebody else's land? So I think that there's something to be said for having the conversation up front with the contractor so that everybody is clear about what happens if the contractor make mistakes. I think Asenath's point to, if something isn't feeling right or if something isn't going well, being really transparent and upfront, and just have the awkward conversations early and upfront before they become awkward and difficult. But yeah, what do you do when there is a legitimate problem? And a good example might be something like they sprayed, but there were target species that got damaged, and there were either native plants damaged or trees died because they were doing understory spraying. I think it's a negotiation. Are you gonna seek compensation from the contractor? Is it big enough, significant enough that it's something they're gonna pay for? Are they gonna file an insurance claim? Is it something that you, depending upon that, if you signed a contract, you may have signed something that said they are not responsible for incidental damages. Like if they're doing what the landowner asked them to do, I think there's just always going to be that negotiation with it. So I don't have any specific advice other than talk about it ahead of time, talk about it while it's happening, and be really factual about it after it happens, not emotional. So a tree died. The tree is dead, but try not to attach the emotionality to it that one might as a landowner about the loss of the tree, because I think when those difficult situations become emotional, they become less about what is factually possible. So I think that's probably my advice on it. Most contractors want to do great work. They do not want the reputation of having done things wrong. And I think in the same vein, like, they are usually willing to correct and do what they can to meet the customer's expectations. So
thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. Shifting gears here, we have a question from Sarah asking, does anyone have suggestions or resources for protocols that landowners could attempt in a rapidish style baseline survey for forest understory, perhaps a citizen science type survey or something similar. Do either of you know any kind of recommended baseline practices that could be taken on by a landowner?
I mean, I guess Sarah, you're asking like specifically about understory. Is it sort of like wanting to know what native or invasive populations are there in the understory? And then as you apply other practices like timber stand improvement or interseeding, what kind of happens over time? I mean, some of the most simple is just doing meandering surveys and species lists, and you just meander and you write down the species that you find. That's at the level of botanical knowledge that you may have as a landowner. Contracting somebody to do kind of point surveys, and you can just methodically like go through your property, and you know, if you've got 30 acres, you stop at the center of each acre and just take an inventory of what you're seeing. I do think it's important to think about, like, the key word to me there is baseline, because baseline is like starting, it's what's here now, and how do you know if what you're doing is working over time? So I can't think of like an immediate resource. I'll have to ponder on it. That would be like a citizen science immediate thing, but
Photo points can also be a really fun way to monitor your land as a landowner by establishing a post in the ground that you, like, at each cardinal direction, take a photograph of every so often, and whether that's once a year, every 3 years, or pre and post different management, it can be a really great way to see those changes over time that sometimes when we are out on our land on a daily basis observing it can kind of be missed. So that it's just another thing I've seen landowners do with some success. I would like to ask, there's a few questions in here that perhaps could be combined into one by helping share what types of resources do you know that might be available for landowners in terms of grants or programs that might help assist with some of the different practices, and is there any experience with that? And I think that will be our last question, just so we remain respectful for everyone's time.
I do not have the experience that I'm sure Hannah has with this, but the landowners incentive program through the Wisconsin DNR is one that is available to people who are not enrolled in like the federal managed forest program or the federal conservation reserve program. I was fortunate enough to get a small LIP grant, and it's for our kind of property, not really big enough to be in the big federal programs. And also there is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a partnership program that again can do small grants or large ones for that matter. But again, it's a resource for people who may not be using like managed forest. Well.
You know, it's hard for me to answer that quickly just because there are so many resources, and the Nature Conservancy has access to ones that private landowners may not have access to, and private landowners have access to ones that as a larger organization I don't, and so I'm not familiar with. And I think, you know, maybe Alana, maybe I can just give a few more resources after the fact, and we can add it to the mix, because there are some really good ones. Like one that comes to mind, the Southern Driftless Grasslands Project has kind of a resource for landowners, and it's like a spider web. If you land there, you can suddenly have all the links to like 15 different resources that can help landowners. It's regional to Southwest, but yeah, and the private programs that Asenath mentioned. The good thing I can say is that the contractors are pretty savvy about these programs.
We are.
And the contractors are pretty savvy about shepherding landowners through applying for them. You can even hire a contractor to write the application for you. It's got your name on it because you're the one handling the finances, but it's a mechanism through which they help generate work and projects. And most of those landowners know where those grants are. Most of those landowners know the private lands biologists at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NRCS, and DNR. So you can really lean on your contractors to help connect some of those dots as well. But I'll get Alana some other links for where you can go for things like that.
Thank you so very much, Hannah and Asenath, for sharing all of your expertise and tips with us today. It was super helpful. I'm sure gives us all a lot to ponder as we think about tackling projects on our own properties. One other just resource that I'd encourage you to think about is continue attending the different WeWick events that we have coming up. We have 3 more summer camps, as Esther mentioned at the beginning of the call. The next one on regenerative agriculture, followed by prairies and pollinators in July. And then in August, cover crops and understanding cover crops and the benefits to soil health. We also at WeWick have a podcast where Chris interviews landowners across the state doing really fantastic things on their property. A great opportunity to get some new ideas and hear of resources that are helping those landowners that might also help you. We also have a listserv in which I'd encourage all of you to sign up for. All you need to do is send an email to info@wewick.org, and I think someone will pop a link of that in the chat. That is a great place to pose questions to a whole group of individuals who will share their ideas and suggestions, and it's a great place just to network with other landowners and resource professionals across the state working in conservation. And lastly, would encourage you to follow along on our blog so that you can hear of upcoming events and stay in touch with other resources that can help you with your work. The last little reminder is please, if you are an educator in natural resources and conservation, please save the date for November 14th. We will be gathering from 10 to 11:30 here with an opportunity to network with one another and have a little professional development time. So I'm looking forward to seeing everyone then. Thank you all so much. And if anybody wants to stick around and ask a particular question, we can stay on for 5 or so more minutes before we log off. Otherwise, have a wonderful day.